All right, so welcome to episode 6 of Crushing the Micros, season 2, and today we're going to talk about cold calling preflop. And once again, I'm joined by Andrew and Reese, who are going to help us navigate through this topic and subsequent topics. So, first of all, when should I cold call preflop? And there's obviously there's more than just 3 examples, but there's 3 kind of key examples that I want to go over, and I want to talk about what makes each of these a profitable situation to be cold calling, and then maybe some situations where you could misapply what this says. So the first one is you've got a small pocket pair, and a pot is most likely going to be multi-way, and the opener is a pretty straightforward player. So, in the second situation, you have position versus a villain who has a well-defined range, is going to be playing weak tight, and you're pretty deep, which means that he's going to start playing weak tight post-flop, and again, we'll talk about what kind of hands you should be playing there and what kind of villain we're going to be looking for. And the third situation that I could think of is you've got a pretty strong hand, but you're going to be out of position versus a villain who never folds pre-flop. And we'll talk about what it means to never fold. I mean, it's not that he never folds, it's that they fold very, very seldom and they're stealing a lot. So that's going to be another situation to be cold calling. All right, so let's look at our first example. So in our first example, we are in the small blind with pocket fours. So a nit opens from early position, and right off the bat, that's a good thing for us, because anytime a nit is opening from early position, they've got a pretty tight range. So we know his range is skewed towards high pocket pairs and high cards. And a tourist calls, and that's even better for us because now the pot's guaranteed to be multi-way. And anytime you've got a pot multi-way, obviously the value of your pocket pairs goes up significantly. The other good thing that's in this situation right now is the tourist is pretty deep. So the tourist is sitting on 120 BBs, and we're sitting on 200 and 200 and something BBs. But we're sitting on 200 BBs, and there's one more tourist who is in the big blind. So the key thing to notice here is these guys are unlikely to be squeezing. So that's great for us. We call, and the tourist calls. Now, we'll talk about a little bit about post-flop in a second, but so this is example number 1, kind of what we talked about, where you've got a small pocket pair multi-way. Now, how small of a pair should you be calling here? So let's take a closer look at the situation. As I mentioned, you're deep with 2 fish, but we'll be out of position against them. So we're deep with the tourist and tourist number 1. We're out of position against them, but with pocket pairs, it really doesn't make much of a difference. So the nit opened in early position, so his range is weighed towards strength. And like I said, the second tourist is unlikely to squeeze. Now, I would probably be calling here with 2s through 10s. 10s are kind of close. I could certainly squeeze 10, but I don't want to call with 10s. And I would also be cold calling here with ace-queen offsuit. I would probably be squeezing with ace-queen suited and obviously ace-king and then jacks plus. The reason I'm not squeezing with ace-queen is that these guys are very likely to call, so I really want to be squeezing with the absolute top of my range. And I don't mind playing 10s multi-way. I think they're going to flop just well enough. Now, you want to be dumping your suited connectors and suited aces. Sometimes you'll want to be cold calling with these hands in some situations, but in this, you just have reverse implied odds against you, and it's just going to be too tough to play. So in this kind of situation, keep things simple. Like I said, I would call with small pocket pairs up to tens and probably ace-queen offsuit. Now, the thing about ace-queen offsuit is if I flop an ace or a queen, I'm probably going to be leading. So I'm going to be leading in a lot of situations. And in fact, in this situation, I would probably lead my set. And the reason I would lead my set is that most likely one of these two guys, one of these two tourists is going to come along, and then if the nit has a hand, he more often than not is going to raise, and that's just going to allow me to play the hand fast and just kind of put him to a decision. I don't mind checking, but the problem with checking is that if the nit has nothing, it's often going to go check, 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 and then we get to the turn, and I would like to start building the pot given how deep I am with these tourists. And in fact, if the nit raises, I don't mind flat calling after I lead out. So I think that's going to be the optimal line for us in this situation. If I cold called with pocket nines or even pocket tens, I don't mind leading this multi-way either, just because it's gonna be it'll be easiest for us to play, I think, if we lead, because then if we check calling sucks. So I would lead here with sets and hands like nines and tens.
Would you lead the flop if you flopped an overpair with nines and tens?
I would think so, yeah, because the nit's going to be playing very straightforwardly. So if I had tens and the flop's like low cards, right? Yeah, I would lead because the tourists are going to be calling with any kind of pair, any kind of draw, and if I lead and the tourist calls, unless the nit has an overpair, he's not going to be raising. He's probably going to be folding. The other thing about leading is it protects me from overcards. So if I have pocket tens, there's 16 different cards that can come on the turn, which now I'm not even going to be sure if I have the best hand. Whereas I'm pretty sure I have the best hand with pocket tens if I have an overpair. So yeah, we're definitely calling with the intention of playing aggressively if we hit.
Can I would also just wanted to add that it could be tempting here to check raise this kind of flop versus the nit, but I think that because you lead, you don't define your hand as strongly as you would if you did check raise, and I think that on a board as dry as this, you're going to be able to get more value by leading and then letting the tourist come along and then letting the nit raise on top of that, because he has no idea what you have. Whereas when you actually do check raise this kind of flop, your hand basically
is fours or eights, right?
Yeah, it's
possibly
really
jacks.
massive hand. Yeah.
You could also then just check raise the turn. I guess
Yeah, that's a really good
caller.
point. Yeah, kind of building on that. If I check, the nit's not gonna bet unless he has an overpair or ace jack or king jack. Now those are the hands he's gonna be calling or raising with anyhow if I lead. So my hand's gonna be a lot less defined, and like I said, if I lead and the tourist calls and the nit raises, it's so dry that I don't mind a flat call. And then the tourist is probably going to flat call, and then I actually don't mind like a donk lead on the turn, something like 1/3 pot, or even a quarter pot on the turn. And then the tourist is the thing about leading here is we're trying to keep this tourist guy in, and we're trying to give him all kinds of odds because we have this board crushed. And if the nit has an overpair or a hijack I mean, his money's going in anyhow. It's just we're trying to come up with the best money, with the best way of trapping as much of the tourists' money as we can.
Hmm.
All right. So should we look at the next situation?
Yeah. Yeah.
All right.
Do it.
So here's the next situation where we're in position and deep. And I think I've been watching some videos by some of my students, and they misapply this quite a bit. So basically, a nit raises, and a couple of things have to be the case here. One, we need to be deep. I think cold calling here with 100 BBs is not going to be profitable. The other thing is they have to be pretty weak tight post flop. So basically, we're calling here because we're deep, and we know that they're going to be weak tight. So we go to the flop and flop a gut shot. But we'll talk about a little bit about kind of how to play this hand. But let's take a close look at this situation. So I would be calling here, definitely all pocket pairs smaller than queens. I think I would even be cold calling jacks. I think they have too much value post flop, and I think 3-betting them, they can't really stand a 4-bet. Also like calling suited connectors like 5-6 suited, maybe even as small as 4-5 suited, but definitely not smaller. And hands like all the way up to king-queen suited. I think while king-queen suited is a hand that's going to be dominated, you're never going to lose your stack if you flop a king or a queen, and he barrels a lot. But I think it's even against a nit, it's going to be too strong to just fold. Ace-jack suited, it's pretty close. Depending on who's in the blinds, I could certainly see myself calling with ace-jack suited. Ace-jack offsuit, I would probably fold. So king-queen suited, I already said. Ace-queen offsuit, I think, is also going to be a good hand for us to cold call. I think folding it is a little bit too weak. 3-betting it is okay, but I think it has too much value. Now, I also want to talk a little bit of hands that you're going to be 3-betting in this situation. And I think suited aces, like low suited aces, are going to be good hands to 3-bet, and I'll talk about why in a second. Just to put pressure on the nit, and it's just they're going to be hands that are going to show an immediate profit in that situation. But in addition to that, definitely your big pairs like queens and higher and ace king are going to be good ones. Now, a couple things to pay attention to. You don't want a really aggressive player who's going to be squeezing here. So you probably don't want to have a really aggressive player who's squeezing on your left anyhow. But that's something to pay attention to. The second thing is you want to be able to put pressure on the nit. So how do we actually play the hand? So I think he's going to be c-betting this a lot. Now, you want to pay attention to how often they c-bet. If they c-bet, 70% or more, if they c-bet very infrequently, like 50%, and they bet this, I would probably still call, but more often than not, on a board like this, they're just going to check, and then you're going to bet, and they're going to fold. But if they do bet, and if they bet, I would say 70% or more, then I think in this situation, so we have some options. I think folding is the worst option for a couple of reasons. One, we actually have a draw, so we have a gut shot. Two, this guy is not going to be putting a lot more money in after the flop. So this might be a situation where they're just taking a stab at it, and they're going to fold on the turn. And even if they don't, we can improve and be able to get more out of them. I think by raising, we represent a really narrow range. So by raising, we're essentially representing, fives, pocket fives, pocket fours, potentially pocket tens. Although with pocket tens, we would probably flat call here because there's just not enough draws in his range. So I think by far the best play is calling here. So by calling, we represent a much wider range. We represent everything we would be raising with, and then in addition, we represent hands like flush draws, straight draws, pocket nines, pocket sixes, pocket sevens, pocket eights. We could represent a lot more by flatting here. All right, the turn is a 3, which is a pretty innocuous card, and if they bet again here, then we're going to be folding just because his range is going to be very strong, and he's going to have an overpair almost always. But often in this situation, usually if like a spade falls or something like this, which completes a straight, they're often going to be going for pot control. And if they c-bet the flop with a hand like pocket eights themselves, or ace king, ace queen, king queen, then we're just going to be able to bet here. So once they check, our best bet is to bet and hope to get a fold. So yeah, basically with a hand like 7-8 suited, we're calling pre-flop in order to float just a wide variety of flops and bluff raise some flops. This is probably not connected enough to warrant a bluff raise, but definitely, when you're calling with hands like this, be thinking, I'm calling to either bluff raise or float. Obviously, some spots are just really bad spots to float, but this kind of a board, I would say it's a mandatory float or a mandatory bluff raise. So now let's talk a little bit about suited aces. So if we're in the same situation and we're sitting on a hand like ace 4 suited pre-flop, and the nit opens, it's going to be a profitable spot for you to 3-bet. And the reason for that is most nits play weak tight poker, so they're going to be either folding a lot pre-flop to your 3-bets, or they're going to be calling with pocket pairs and then check folding the flop. So anytime you don't get 4-bet and they call or fold, you are probably going to win. It's going to be a plus EV situation for you. So when you have a hand like ace of clubs, 3 of clubs, then the likelihood of them having pocket aces, so we're assuming they're going to be 4-betting you with aces and kings. They're probably not going to be 4-betting you with queens when you're deep, and they might be 4-betting you with ace king. But because you have an ace yourself, the chances of them having pocket aces drops by 50%, and the chances of them having ace king drops by 25% because you already have an ace. More often than not, they're going to be calling. Actually, more often than not, they're going to be folding, and other times they're going to be calling. So even if they call, you're going to be in good situation because any kind of a flop, or I should say, any flop, there's a 50% chance or more that it's going to contain an ace, king, or queen, and we're going to be able to bet, and we're going to be able to take it down. So, yeah, basically, it's just going to be a profitable situation for you to be 3-betting, and specifically by 3-betting like suited aces, it just takes that much of their range out of what they could be using to play back at you. So does that kind of make sense?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it makes sense. I could see people getting carried away with it though, definitely.
Yeah, certainly. And the key thing is to be 3-betting the right people. But the bottom line is, nits are just going to be folding to a lot of 3-bets. So 3-betting them is going to be profitable.
But do you think that under the gun +1 range is wide enough to include that many hands that will fold?
I think they're going to be raising all kinds of pocket pairs, and like hands like ace jack and ace queen, and all those hands they're going to be dumping to a 3-bet. King queen suited. So yeah, I think there's going to be enough hands in their range that they're raising to where 3-betting them there is going to be profitable.
I think that definitely makes sense, but there shouldn't. I mean, not that we shouldn't be trying to win money from these nits any way that we can, but just that it should be. You should bear in mind the fact that these are not the main targets for our 3-bets.
They're not, but it's definitely going to be a profitable situation. And I guess what I'm saying is, if you're going to be 3-betting them, then this is a good hand to do it with, and kind of why.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, they shouldn't. So we will have a whole discussion about 3-bets and 3-bet pots in the next episode. Well, not the next episode is going to be a video, but the one after that. And yeah, so I'll talk specifically about, I guess specifically about post-flop play, but yeah, this is something to try.
Okay, I'll write some questions down.
Good. Now, here's the common mistakes that I've seen a lot of my students do. So, first of all, we're not calling with a hand like 7-8 suited in order to flop hard. You're calling with the intention of putting pressure on your opponent post-flop. Now, I guess the thing is, do the players perceive as weak type pre-flop and post-flop, not against random donks or calling stations. So, if some random guy is opening from early position, cold calling a hand like 7-8 suited probably is not going to be profitable. Now, of course, the deeper they are, the more profitable it's going to be, and the tighter they are, the more profitable it's going to be. But if you've got some random, like, 29-15 player opens under the gun, you're sitting on 7-8 suited on the button, it's just not going to be profitable to cold call. But if you do cold call, you're calling with the intention of you're not going to be hitting hard enough to warrant cold calling. So hands like that, you just have to be in kind of a specific situation, kind of like this one, to make it profitable. So also against calling stations, if you do decide to put a move, I guess we'll talk about bluffing in down the road, but don't try to bluff players you don't know, and don't try to bluff players that are like massive calling stations. So anyhow, all right. Let's. Do you have any other questions about this hand? But this is kind of the second situation where we can cold call pre-flop and make it profitable. All right. Any questions on this hand before we go on?
Nope.
All right.
No, not at all.
1 second. So before we go on to example number 3, Reese, you had a question about suited aces, right? Kind of in a situation like this.
Yes. So you mentioned that with suited aces, or sort of small suited aces, you would probably fold and not consider this as a good spot to get in there with.
Right.
But I was sort of saying, you're looking like going 4-way. Wouldn't that be just a great opportunity to be in there?
Well,
Hard.
the thing is, so I think if I was in the big blind, I would be much more likely. So if the positions were switched, and if I was where tourist 1 is, and if tourist 1 is where I was, and we have a raise from the nit, a call from the tourist, a call from the tourist 1, then yeah, then I think you can add a lot of the suited connectors and suited aces to your calling range here, because that guarantees you that you're going to be 4-way, and you're going to have relative position on the nit. So I think that's drastically different from being, 3-way, at least 3-way, not for sure 4-way. Because the tourists can still fold. Yeah, it's likely that if they're a calling station enough, then they're going to be calling. But we're still going to be in the worst position. On the flop, if the positions are switched, it's usually going to go like this. We're going to be in relative position. So tourist is going to check, we're going to check. The nit's going to decide what they want to do. So if they bet, then we'll see what the tourist does and what this other tourist does. And essentially, we're last to act post-flop, being in the big blind. If we're in the small blind, that's not going to be the case. If we're in the small blind, it's going to go, it's usually going to go check, check. Then they'll decide what to do. Then the tourist will decide what he wants to do. And then we're faced with a decision, but we're still not sure what tourist one is going to do. So
Yeah.
I think the positions, when the positions are switched, it's a significant difference. Like I said, we're guaranteed to be four-way if we see that tourist one calls. So and we're in relative position. So I think it's a good question, but that these two positions when they're switched, they do make a difference. In addition, this might be minor, but we're getting a much better price out of the big blind than we are in the small blind. Well, not much better price, but yeah. So at 25 no limit, it's 10 cents, and so it would only be I guess it's only 60 more cents if we're in the big blind. So for one, we're just getting better odds, and we're guaranteed those better odds by tourist one calling.
Yeah.
And you definitely get to play in position against at least one tourist.
Yeah, and you definitely get to play in position versus at least one tourist. Yeah, you're right. All right, so here's a third situation. And that is versus a villain who does not fold pre-flop to 3-bets. So let's take a look at the hand. So bully raises, and we flat call. And the reason we flat call is this guy, he folds to 3-bets like, I don't know, 15% of the time. So I think King Jack is just too strong. Now, I'll talk about what kind of bully specifically. Well, let's talk about the kind of bully. Oops. Here we go. So what kind of villain are we targeting here? We're targeting somebody who steals 40% or more from late position. And that's what a steal is defined as. It's a raise from the cutoff or the button. So if somebody's raising 40% or more of hands, they're going to be raising a lot of junk. Now, in addition to that, they need to be folding to 3-bets 50% or less. So not only do they raise a lot, but they defend their raises a lot. A third category is they love to float all sorts of flops. So not only do they not fold to 3-bets, but any kind of a flop, they're already thinking about ways to outplay you, quote unquote. And basically, they're just going to be calling any kind of a flop. If it comes ace high, they're going to call because they're going to put you on a small pocket pair. If it comes non-ace high, they're going to call because they're going to put you on ace king. So probably the only kind of flop they're going to be folding are like king XX, blank, or like ace king X. But they might not even fold ace king X. So these kind of guys are going to be, they're going to be tough to be 3-betting. So we will want to start calling a little bit more. So against these people, I would be folding my small pocket pairs lower than 7s, but with like 7 and 8s, I would be 7, 8s, maybe even 9s I would be calling. 9s are kind of borderline because 9s flop just well enough to where we're going to be comfortable playing them post-flop. But I would say 7 and 8s, maybe 9s even, we can be cold calling. And then in addition, a lot of the Broadway cards, so like King Jack offsuit and higher, Queen Jack offsuit, I would say suited aces, Ace 9 suited and higher, Ace 10 offsuit and higher, and then King 10 suited and higher. All these cards are going to be way ahead of the villain's range, and we're going to be able to play them profitably post-flop. So, um,
Paul,
yes.
can I ask you a quick question?
Sure.
Just that, can you draw attention just quickly to the distinction that should be made between this kind of player opening on the button and why we're happy to, cold call with hands like Queen Jack off, basically high card type hands, as opposed to, like small pocket pairs and things like that we might against a tighter player.
Yeah, and that's kind of the huge difference is that we're much more versus a tight button opener. We're going to be looking to cold call our small pocket pairs and dump our high Broadway cards. But the situation is reversed versus a bully type or a drunk type player who um, basically it's
It's to do with reverse implied odds.
well, I was gonna say yeah. So I was gonna say like reverse domination or domination. Um, the bully is gonna be raising so many hands that we have crushed when we actually hit our hand. So if we have a hand like King 10 suited and we flop a king or a 10, well, if we flop a king, we're going to play it a little bit more passively. If we flop a 10 and it's 10 high, we're going to play it a little bit more aggressively because they're going to be in there with all kinds of worse 10s, all kinds of worse kings, um, all kinds of just random garbage. And a hand like King Jack is going to hit the flop about 1 out of 3 times it's going to hit, whereas a small pocket pair 1 out of 8 times it's going to hit. So you're just going to hit a lot more often with these kind of cards, and they're going to fare much better versus the villain's range. Is that kind of what you were looking for? Do you want to? Would you like to add to that?
No, that's definitely. I wanted to draw attention to the idea that high card type hands have so much more value versus this player type, and that's why cold calling isn't as criminal. Well, isn't the crime it would be ordinarily
Yeah.
versus like a tighter late position.
I mean, versus a tighter player, a hand like King 10 offsuit, we're just going to be dumping. But versus a player that's opening a lot, I think you have to call here. Now, they see bet this. In this situation with so many draws, I'm raising this and I'm playing for stacks because, if they have a set or if they have me out kick or if they have an overpair, I'm just going to attribute that to a cooler. And I'll see somebody post on the forums and they run into a hand like pocket queens here, and then they say, well, should I have played it differently? No, I mean, you just, given how much this guy's opening, they're going to be playing pretty aggressively. So if they shove here, they'll often have a draw. More often than not, they're just going to flat call here. And they're going to flat call with a wide range, and we're going to be able to proceed accordingly. But yeah, once I actually hit, I'm definitely going to be playing this aggressively. Versus this kind of a player. Versus a nit or versus a regular card runners type player, that's not going to be as good of a play.
Do you think you'd play it as aggressively if the board wasn't as drawy? Let's say it came like Jack 3 deuce rainbow. Or wouldn't you maybe play it more passively because as a bully he's going to be barreling a lot just with his entire range?
I think I probably wouldn't play it as aggressively. What I might often do is if I have the board that crushed, I would often check call lead. And just because I don't want to, I don't mind a check raise here because it just keeps him from, if he has a random queen or ace, it just keeps him from spiking that, and it kind of gives me control of the hand. And they're not going to be folding much anyhow, so I might as well take control of the hand and yeah, just Yeah, if it's like Jack 3-2, I kind of like a check call and then a small lead, just because they're gonna find it suspicious and they're probably not gonna fold anyhow.
Okay, cool.
All right, so. All right, so let's look at the last example. And this time I was a little bit more broad. So we've got a raise from the cutoff, and I call this a mistake. And this is what I see a lot of people doing. So there's a couple of situations where calling here, I would say the only time you should call here is if this guy's playing, I mean, if he's playing like super nitty, has like a VPIP of under 13, but in most other situations, you should probably be folding this, and there's a couple of reasons for it. Well, what do you guys see in this situation? I think most micro stakes players would call here, but why would this be a mistake?
Gives the big blind a really good opportunity for a squeeze because your hand just totally looks like what it is.
Yeah.
Cutoff can be raising with much of anything, so it just gives that big blind that great opportunity there.
That's right. Yeah. So not only does the big blind, not only could he be squeezing with a lot here, but he's got a short stack. So you know, short stacks are looking for any kind of opportunity to double up, and this would be a great spot for them to put in a raise here with something like ace-x or some kind of. There's lots of pocket pairs they could have here as well. So yeah, that could definitely happen. Most players from the cutoff and the button are going to have a pretty loose range, or looser range than they would from early position. So his range here is going to be really wide, and fives are just not going to flop hard enough to make that profitable. So I've got some notes. When will this be a mistake? If the villain opens a wide range, even a VPIP of over 20 is going to be. I said, you know, if the villain has a VPIP of under 14, I might be calling there. But even if they have a, yeah, so I'm going to change this. Even if they have a VPIP of like, you know, 16 or something, then I just don't think it's going to be a very profitable spot for you to be cold calling, especially with that short stack in the big blind. And in addition, notice that you're only 100 big blinds deep, effectively. So even if you just don't have the implied odds really to call there. Yeah, but I see a lot of players do that. In addition, I see when somebody opens from the button and they're cold calling. I think small pocket pairs, if somebody raises from the button, more often than not, your two best choices are going to be folding or 3-betting, and you should do that depending, obviously, entirely on the villain's tendencies, like how often they're stealing, how often they're 3-betting, how often they fold to 3-bets, how often they steal, and how loose they are in general. But cold calling here is going to be a mistake. In addition, if you had a hand like King Jack and King Jack offsuit, and the cutoff is playing like pretty tight, then this is you know, totally different from this situation, and you should just be folding that anyhow. So those were the big examples of situations where I thought cold calling would be profitable. For the most part, I think micro and low stakes players have a tendency to cold call too much, and they cold call, so they play passively pre-flop, and then they play passively post-flop, and that's just not going to be profitable. So I needed to cover cold calling before we could start talking about 3-betting, but I think, yeah, I think 3-betting is going to be in combination with cold calling, is really going to allow us to kind of finish up, just well, yeah, just get into more post-flop discussions. But here we're calling in all these situations, example 1, example 2, and example 3. We're putting ourselves in a really, really profitable and favorable situation, which is what we want to do.
Paul.
Yeah.
Can I ask you about the fourth example?
Absolutely.
Let's say that the cutoff was a tightish opener, and the big blind was a tourist on 100 big blinds. Would you advocate a call in that spot?
Yeah, absolutely. And because I'm a lot less likely to get bluffed off my hand 3 ways, and I mean anytime I can get a fish in there, then I'm happy to do so. So if I call, then it's much more likely that the tourist would call as well, and basically I'm setting up a 3-way pot.
Okay.
And I actually don't mind leading in some of those situations. So if I call with pocket 5s and the flop comes like 2, 3, 7, I'm probably going to lead into both of them, because it's unlikely that either of them hit anything, and even if they did, it's just going to be hard for them to it's going to be hard for them to like play back, because if I lead on a board like 2, 3, 7, and the tourist folds and the cutoff, he noticed that I'm just leading the 2 people, and if he's playing tight, he's probably playing a bunch of tables, so he's just not even going to think about it twice, and he's probably just going to fold. I don't think people lead enough at the micros. Obviously, you have to know when to do it and when not to do it, but with hands like pocket 5s, I'm not calling just for a set value. I'm calling because it's going to be profitable for me. I'm calling to put myself in a profitable situation post-flop. So there was a situation, I was sweating one of my students, and it was almost the exact same situation. Cutoff opens, we have a small pocket pair. In the first situation, we folded because the big blind was squeezing a lot. So we're like, well, he's squeezing a lot, so it's unlikely that we'll even ever see the flop. In the second situation, it was a button opener. We had, I think, pocket 4s or pocket 6s, and the big blind was just a huge, he was playing like 30% of his hands. So we cold call with the intention of being in the pot with the big blind. Well, the big blind folded and the flop came 7-9 queen with a flush draw. We just led into the razor with our like pocket 6s, and he was playing something like, I think, 24, 22, and he just insta-mucked. So yeah, you want to be cognizant of your whole environment. Yeah, so don't think to yourself. What a lot of micro stakes players do is they think to themselves, well, I have it's the 10-to-1 rule, so I have the odds to call here, and I'm planning to hit a set. Well, you shouldn't be thinking about that. You should be thinking about, well, what do I know about this guy? Who's left to act? What's my plan post flop? If you're just calling a set mine, you're going to be leaking money.
Yeah, I mean, you might have the odds to call against a player, but
right.
Or even if it's 3-way, but if both players are really, really good players, then you're not likely to get a lot of money in even when you do hit a set. So although up front it looks like you have the implied odds just
right.
because they have the money back, you're not necessarily going to win it even if you do hit. So
and how often do you do hit your set and it goes check, check, check,
and you bet and they fold.
Yeah, like they already have auto muck on. Oh my God. So yeah, so in all these situations, we just want to put ourselves in a situation. So all of these situations are situations where we are not the pre-flop aggressor. So in the last couple of episodes, we really focused on, well, if we open, how do we proceed? Well, now we took a step back and we looked at, if we are in the passive role pre-flop, what's our plan post-flop? And then in the next couple of episodes, we'll look at, well, we're in a really aggressive mode. So now we're 3-betting, and how do we proceed from there? All right. Any other questions and comments? For the most part, you should just be looking to, fold more. In general, I think most micro stakes players, they're already playing pretty tight, but yeah, more often than not, you should be leaning towards maybe like 3-betting or folding. All right.
Cool.
Any other
Cool.
questions? Yeah.
No. I'm done.
All right. So the next episode is going to be a live play episode, and then we'll get into 3-bet pots. So for Reese and Andrew, this is Vernier for CardRunners.com.